Of all the images of violence and destruction that we've all seen over the last week and change, the videos that actually pissed me off the most were these. Healthcare workers across the country stepping out from the hospitals inside of which there's apparently nothing better to do, not even in corona-ravaged New York City, clapping like seals to applaud masses of Black Lives Matter protesters passing through on the street, social distancing be damned. And not just cheering in New York and in Oakland and elsewhere, but actually joining the protests themselves in Washington, D.C., and San Francisco, and beyond. And that's not to minimize the violence or the destruction. Honestly, I've been more demoralized watching the news this week than any other week in recent memory, but there's something that just gets me about shameless, unapologetic hypocrisy. Because let's not forget, in the months that immediately preceded the terrible scenes of violence of the last week, this was the rationale for violating the civil liberties and fundamental rights of Americans in nearly every state in the Union. Black, white, and every color on the spectrum in between. We all had to shut up and surrender our very livelihoods to make sure the health system and the healthcare workers were not endangered. And any dissent otherwise was selfish or even threatening. You can take your pick on the grab bag of headlines from only a few weeks ago. Anti-lockdown protesters put healthcare workers' lives and families at risk. It's detestable that the president would provoke such a thing. Experts warn that these anti-lockdown rallies are going to cause a surge in coronavirus cases. Hey, you COVIDiot, you better sign this waiver forgoing your access to healthcare, because I sure don't want to see you in my ICU because of your foolish decisions. The images of healthcare workers, or quote, people in scrubs, as the most famous one was characterized because it's almost assuredly fake and staged, heroically standing up for their own safety and the safety of their patients, have morphed almost overnight to people in scrubs heroically joining the protesters, as though none of us are supposed to notice or comment how wildly hypocritical this is, and how it exposes every piece of the narrative that was used to ruin livelihoods in this country for months as wildly overstated at best, or an outright lie at worst. The same news networks that were warning us that protesting lockdown was dangerous, irresponsible, and likely to cause viral spread are now covering healthcare workers in close proximity to the most vulnerable joining protests as good news to be celebrated, and giving tips on how to protest safely instead of condemning protest outright. The very same politicians who warned us not to put lives in danger are now gleefully putting lives in danger and resurrecting years-old lies while they do it.
Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot!
2 weeks ago, simply going to the park or going to the beach or opening your business were treated as akin to spitting in a healthcare worker's face. And now you actually can spit in a healthcare worker's face, incidentally, as long as shouting Black Lives Matter is what causes the saliva to expel from your diseased mouth. Make sure you socially distance, that's over. Make sure you avoid large gatherings, that's over. And it's not the science of the virus that changed. It is simply the politics, exposing the only possible reality here. It's about the politics now, and it's been about the politics this whole damn time. And hilariously, they will still try to maintain that this is actually all consistent with the warnings of only a few weeks ago. Oh no, we are actually taking the precautions we demand. Look, we're wearing masks. Yeah, except for this guy and that guy over there, and well, take your pick. Oh, and don't forget this guy coughing into his clapping hands with his mask down. As though the masks are impenetrable anyway. They aren't. They might help, but they are not guaranteed protection against viral transmission. These mass gatherings are still incredibly risky behavior, according to the suddenly much quieter experts. In fact, these boisterous protests are among the most risky behaviors possible. Loud speaking and chanting and yelling like this can leave infected droplets in the air for up to 14 minutes. This according to recent MIT and government research. But yes, go ahead and scream a corona plume to crop dust all your revolutionary friends in close proximity. Just don't you dare get a haircut or worship quietly in a pew. Who cares about those people? We don't have to worry about them. They're way too busy with their court dates now anyway. And hey, even if you do infect your comrades, somehow that's way different than those lockdown protesters doing that. See, they were stupid people making stupid choices, but these Black Lives Matter protesters are noble heroes compelled to action by the injustice of the moment. That's why the chair of the New York City Council Health Committee says if there's a corona spike after these protests, don't blame the protesters, blame the racism that forced them into the streets. Well, doesn't that logic work both ways? Can't I blame the petty tyranny you instituted and celebrated just a few weeks ago for forcing people into the streets too? Creating the wave of new cases you repeatedly warned us was coming but never actually did? Or do people only have agency when it's convenient to malign them? You see, the rules change depending on whether we like the politics of the person breaking the rule or not. Thus, these aren't rules at all. They're political tools. That answer is obvious by observation, but I was hoping the people pushing these inconsistencies could at least humor us with some attempted explanation, some reason why the lockdown protesters are evil grandma killers, but the Black Lives Matter protesters are heroic grandma saviors, except for, when they're actually ruining grandma's life.
These people did this for no reason. It's not going to bring George back here. And I'm going to be honest, I wish I was where George was, because this is ridiculous. These people are tearing up our livelihood.
And I remember when ruining grandma's life for your politics was selfishness of the highest order. Now suddenly the mantra is, you got to crack a few grandmas to make a utopia. What are you going to do? There is no explanation but the politics. And nobody's even trying to hide that anymore. The only explanations for the differential treatment and the sudden rule changes openly acknowledge that truth. In the latest insult to injury, some 1,200 of the medical and public health experts whose expertise has been the justification to rob Americans of their fundamental freedoms for months have now signed a letter openly admitting, hey, the rules have changed because the politics have changed. They write in part, when armed white protesters demonstrated at the Michigan State Capitol, we condemned these actions and mourned the rift between science leaders and the communities they serve. Now, Black Lives Matter protests are happening, and we endorse them. In fact, the response to them must be wholly different to the lockdown protesters, because infectious disease science and narratives must be adjacent to anti-racism. Infectious disease experts must be clear and consistent in prioritizing an anti-racist message. After all, white supremacy is a lethal public health issue. But hey, never mind the suicide spike you caused, no lethal consequences there. Never mind the cancer screenings not happening since you shut them down, no lethal consequences there. Never mind the people with heart conditions not seeking exams because you scared them out of it, no lethal consequences there. So go ahead and die, sure. Just don't die a racist death. Any other death, who cares? That has no implications for the politics or the narrative. They're not even hiding it anymore. You can read this letter for yourself. Chances are pretty good it's signed by a leading public health official or physician in your state, and it clearly explains the order of priorities. It is politics first and science second, even in the fields of medicine and health. Science is only a consideration when it serves the politics first, when it's adjacent to the politics, in their words, when it's useful to the political goals. We don't even have to piece together the clues anymore that we were conned out of our fundamental freedoms, out of our very livelihoods themselves for months. They are telling us in plainly worded letters, openly signed by the architects of this scam. It is free reign for those with whom we agree, and for those with whom we disagree, creeping tyranny. And unfortunately, we can't go back and change our response to their scare tactics and their double standards. That's now a part of history. But the obligation for next time could not be clearer. Remember the lessons they are teaching us, seemingly betting that we're too stupid to learn them. We surrender our fundamental rights at our own peril, always. Because what's sold to us as for our own good today will be revealed as for their politics tomorrow. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.